but I'm saying like what's kind of been like if you can go through your big background stops, Cardinals, Astros, the Netherlands, Driveline, what's been kind of like one key thing or what's been one of your biggest lessons learned that you've taken away from each stop and helped shape like who you are now?
I mean, really, like, you want me to go through each stop quickly?
Yeah, this better be at least a 3-minute answer so we can clip it out and drop it in there.
I would say, I mean, it's interesting. Like, I would attribute some of this to like how the game has changed and how the industry has changed. But I was with the Cardinals. My first year was 2012, and then I was also there 14 and 15. And to give you an idea of like where tech was at, Zep came by when 2014, I think 15 maybe. Zep came by and gave a presentation, and I was in the room. I was a minor league coordinator at the time, so I was in the room, hitting coordinator, farm directors in there, and I'm asking all these questions. You know, I just was like really curious, and I'm asking all these questions. I'm like, where's this data from? Like, what's your data set? It was mostly high school players at that time, and we walked out of the room, and they were like, "Yeah, that's lame." You know, they were like, just were like, they were like, "Yeah, like whatever." Kind of just blew it off, and I remember thinking like, "This is huge, you know, it's like a big deal."
Yeah. I've never heard this, by the way. And for people who don't know, Zep's kind of like the initial blast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, isn't it the opposite? Because they like Zep's doesn't have a baseball sensor because it was a patent infringement, right?
Oh yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
So I think Blast may have been
they used to be a semi competitor of Blast, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then I just like that was like the time though. It's crazy like how fast, like I was in the moment of change, I think, or in the 3 to 5 years of massive change. And then you talk about going from an organization like that where they were a little bit behind at the time, or they were normal. And then I went to the Astros, who were like way the fuck out in front. And so I learned, you know, the biggest, I would say like the most impressionable like moments in my baseball career were with the Astros by far, where, I mean, they just were extremely forward thinking and in just about every way, you know, just like, I mean, pitching for sure. Brent Strom was on the front of the end of that. Hitting, Jeff Albert was on the front end of that. And he was like definitely huge, adopting Blast, K-Vest, et cetera, like way back. Not way back, but you know, way back in technology days terms.
Even just high speed.
And there was a lot of, like, I mean, Edgertronic cameras, like just all of it. And I just think that one of the biggest takeaways from there is like there's a lot of like failures with technology in that organization. And it was the big takeaway was like, it was all worth it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm going to give you an example. This is, I mean, someone out there might get mad, but it was a while ago. So like we got, we had not Catapult, like we had GPS sensors for the players, but it was a different company. We were like trying to save money. So we kind of experimented with this other company who had a product out there. And the sensors were like, they weren't lighting on fire, but they were like getting so hot that the players couldn't keep them in the shirts.
What?
So,
it's crazy.
So like, I mean, but just failures like that, we had to upend that entire thing and get rid of it. And I'm sure there was a lot of money loss and things like that where we just tried a bunch of stuff. And my last year I was in AA. I was Latin American coordinator for 2 years, AA for the third year. And I was managing 8 different technologies as a strength coach, you know? So there's a lot of stuff going on, like just interacting with that and also seeing the value of it. And I mean, obviously I was hired by the Yankees, by Dylan Lawson, who was with the Astros for 3 years while I was there. And so developing that relationship and also seeing him being on the front end of some stuff like you know, I've talked about this on plenty of interviews before, but he was on the front end. I believe he was on the front end of eye tracking in baseball. Not, you know, Fatty obviously was around longer and Mann and Mueller and all these people. But as far as like actually implementing it into a program full scale.
As far as like rocket to the moon.
Yeah, like they, you know, well, as far as like, like there was there's been research obviously for decades, but as far as somebody taking it and creating like a system and really applying it. Yeah. I mean, I saw like I would go in and sit in on his talks with the Astros as a strength coach, go in and sit in the room while they were doing occlusion video.
Yeah.
And
when was that? What year was that?
2016.
I thought, was he still in college at 2000? Was he was at Mizzou, right?
No, yeah, sorry. He went to Mizzou. He was Astros. He went to Mizzou for a year and went back.
Yeah, because I want to say in 2017 I had a call with him at like out of nowhere, Ochart set me up with a call with him, and it was like crazy because the first time I ever talked to him, and he just like asked me like an hour and a half of the most targeted like player development hitting.
Yeah.
A lot of it was about the EEG stuff that we did in 2017.
Yeah.
But also, just like a ton of like pitch recognition. And again, it was just like quick phone call. Thought it'd be a couple questions about like the blog, and it was like an hour and a half of like very, very.
Yeah. Like that's my boss. He's so awesome. So I think just like, obviously I've talked a lot about like kind of my experience with the Astros, but they were so far ahead in many things, and probably just tried things that failed a lot, and that's like a huge lesson, obviously. For me, I mean, going back to school in the Netherlands was a huge risk, but I mean, you guys on this podcast know me, like I don't believe in your ability to succeed on a large scale if you're not taking big risks. And it was a huge risk, but at the same time, it was calculated for me because I kind of knew what I was doing, but I don't think anybody else knew what I was doing. So everyone was like, why would you ever do that?
And what were your degrees in again for the listeners?
So my undergrad's exercise science, master's degree at LSU was in sports administration, did a graduate assistantship there as a strength coach. And then I went to the Netherlands to do an MSc in human movement sciences with a specialty in biomechanics. And then there is a research degree. So obviously not the traditional training that Brady got in biomechanics, but more so like literally just learned how to do research in biomechanics. And obviously, as you guys know, I still know so little about that. So that's cool for you. But anyway, so it set me up to do research. I was supposed to come to Driveline and do 2 research studies. I didn't finish either of those. So again,
that's Driveline, baby.
Testament to the struggles of research
conversations we've had.
Yeah, my big takeaway from the research and drinks department at Driveline was research is hard. It takes a long time.
Easy.
Yeah.
Research is hard.
The research is hard. The drinks are easy.
That should be our tagline.
Research is hard, and that's why we drink.
Yeah. But all kidding aside, like the Netherlands, for sure, I did a ton of work. I transitioned to being a hitting coach in the Netherlands, even though it was with lower level baseball, obviously, than professional baseball, and did a ton of stuff with the constraints-led approach and like Franz Bosch methodology, I guess, implemented both in the weight room and in the cages, like all kinds of environmental constraints.
By the way, I don't even know anything about this. This is news to me as well. So yeah, keep going. I don't know too much about the stuff you did in the Netherlands.
Yeah, they're like super. So Franz Bosch, just for the listeners or whoever, all the thousands, tens of thousands of listeners on here. Franz Bosch is a professor actually in the Netherlands, and his background is in track. And he basically teaches dynamic system theory. And what that means is it's like constraints-led approach is basically where you change the environment to elicit a behavior. And so like as a hitting coach, like you put a string across the cage and say like, don't hit the string, or you put a tee behind someone's hips and you're like, okay, to get them to load better, go back and touch the tee, instead of saying, put your hips back, like some kind of internal cue to make them think about their body. So that's a very simplistic way to say like you're changing the environment and you're cueing them to the environment, and you're not cueing their body or like, oh, do this with your hands. You're not doing that. You just give them a really heavy bat, and then all of a sudden their mechanics change. So that's a constraints-led approach. And I would say the Netherlands, on a scale of 1 to 10 of like what their methodology is, like they are a 10 constraints-led approach. So like everything they do is from that lens and perspective. So that was really something really different, but also to the magnitude that they did it was like something I definitely had never seen. So it was like my basically introduction to being in the cages.
Do you remember really quickly? Not cut you off, but I'm really curious about this. Do you remember the kind of range of weights they used for the bats? Like what was the lightest? What was the heaviest?
I don't remember. It's a good question.
Because I'm curious how it compares to our training as well.
I know I was working with softball and baseball, but also I will say like there's pros and cons to everything. The thing about the Netherlands is that they're ahead in some ways, but also their budget and abilities they don't have the stuff. So they didn't have axe bats, like they just like made random heavy bats and random
penny bats.
Like, what'd you say?
Like penny bats, like
they just
the long bat. We just put a bunch of coins on.
Yeah, they just, and their environmental constraints were just like they'd put a block underneath someone's foot for like underneath someone's front foot, or like it was I wouldn't say it was like as measured, as what I was used to. It was just more conceptual and not as like precise, I guess.